I'm not gonna show emotions, so everything is fine. Do not worry, mom. I'm gonna take care of you. I'm just not gonna think about myself. I'm gonna do everything in my power to make you feel good. And I'm gonna try to avoid conflict, because conflict is gonna create this stressful environment.
I am Lucia Gallegos, and this is Flowers in Winter.
Hello, my name is Lucia Gallegos, and I'm a registered psychotherapist in Ontario, Canada. And welcome again to Flowers in Winter, a podcast where I talk and discuss topics on women's and mental health. And thank you for being here. And for today's topic, I'm going to start by sharing a story that happened some years ago. When I was talking to a person, and this person, she told me that her sister was getting divorced, and she was so surprised on how her niece was being so responsible, so mature, and such a good girl. The niece at the time, she was, if I remember correctly, around 10, 11 years old, and was the only child. And at that moment, she stayed with the mom, and they observed the family, how she, under that circumstance, that her parents getting divorced, she looked so mature for her age. She was such a good girl. She did all the chores that she needs to do. She never complained. She always told her mom, don't worry, we're not doing well. Everything's gonna be fine. Everything's gonna be good. I'm gonna be a good daughter. Everything's gonna be fine. And when I try to remember and picture this little girl, 10, 11 years old at that time, taking such responsibility, I wonder, where is she now? And how those coping mechanisms she used in childhood are somehow being present in her adult life now. And before we start, remember just to keep in mind, the content of this podcast is intended to be informative, to provide information on mental health. If you would like to get support or professional support, always seek advice of your professional mental health practitioner. So I wanted to start today's topic with this story, and it's a common story. And you may say, so how is that related to trauma? And let's start by defining trauma first. Let me ask you, what comes to your mind? What image comes to your mind when you think the word trauma? Sometimes we might go when it's related to war events or catastrophic events related to nature or to war, or those are traumatic events. But also there is something called complex trauma. And trauma, the definition is that is an emotional response to a distressful situation. It's important to have that clear. And also, there are three important factors when we talk about trauma. One is there is stress, and be careful here. Not all the stressful situations are traumatic. However, what we have observed, and when I observe in my practice, is that traumatic events are distressful. Number two, when that occurs, when that happens, there is no support or resources to deal with that. Like feeling lost. And number three is feeling stuck, not identifying what is it that is happening to you. So that is trauma. And we somehow have experienced it in one or another way. And in childhood, we experience some situations because we feel so vulnerable at that age. We need our caregivers, mother, father, to take care of ourselves. When we do not feel safe and we are experiencing these three elements, we are experiencing trauma. But the thing is, we don't know how to name it because we cannot identify it. If we go back to this scenario, to the story that I started with at the beginning, is we just seen from one angle that this little child, she was having a really good behavior towards a really stressful situation. But if we go deep and we try to explore it more, what she was doing is to create a coping mechanism to deal with all this situation. Because experiencing or witnessing your parents getting divorced is really stressful and traumatic. And probably instead of getting support, she was becoming more the solution, to say it so. And this is not because, probably the mother was a really bad mother or the father was a really bad father. They did what they could with the tools they had. But sometimes we normalize this, and instead of paying attention to the stress the child is happening, we can perceive it as, wow, she is such a good girl. And that has an effect on how we behave as an adult and the challenges that we experience. Let me give you another example. Let's say you're walking on the street, probably it's a little girl, you were 5 years old, 6 years old, and you fall down. And at that moment, maybe your mother or your father, what they do, their reaction could be, oh my God, you always fall, like you're so silly, like what's happening with you? You have to pay my attention. What are you doing? What's happening? Blah, 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 right? And also like pay attention to my tone of voice, right? There is judgment there. The child is gonna feel so vulnerable at that part, like not supported. And another scenario is like, let's say that the same child is walking and also falls. But the mother, the father, the caregiver, the response is more like, oh, are you okay? Are you okay? Oh, okay. Look at my tone of voice. Are you okay? How are you feeling? Oh, you have to pay me attention, my dear. But okay, it's fine. We fall. Just pay attention. It's okay. You see, the child had a similar experience. The reaction and the response was different, though. One probably is going to be fearful about falling down. I'm going to try to avoid that because that's mean being rejected by parents. The other one's going to feel more comfortable probably in those situations. I love this idea because we can then explain and use this as an image that can help us to understand that it's not the event, but it's how we respond to that event, and if we have a support network and resources to deal with that event. So if we go back to the scenario that I talked at the beginning of this girl, the good girl, right? She's always taking care of her mother. She's responsible. She's really good. Basically, what we're seeing here is that her coping mechanisms in order to not be rejected, because one of the worst things that could happen is being rejected. When we are so young, we depend on other people. So we're going to develop some coping mechanism in order to feel safe. And those mechanisms, it's like they're freezing time. And when we're adults, they're still appearing. First one, right? Like this little girl. Her coping mechanism is like, you know what? I'm just going to be here and I'm just to be that part of the dynamic. I'm going to be the good one. I'm not going to show emotions. So everything is fine. Do not worry, mom. I'm going to take care of you. And then, so the next one, probably the next thing that's going to happen is like, I'm just not going to think about myself. I'm going to do everything in my power to make you feel good. Probably also feeling responsible. It's like it is my job, my task to make my mother or my father feel good. And I'm going to try to avoid conflict because conflict is going to create this stressful environment. So all my behaviors are going to be somehow under these characteristics. She somehow learned those behaviors, those coping mechanisms. However, when probably she becomes an adult, and I've seen this in my practice, when people with good girls characteristics come and they start experiencing and talking about themselves, we kind of explore how these behaviors are now triggering some anxious or depressive symptoms. For instance, they find it so difficult to set up boundaries because that's create a conflict. And someone who identifies as the good girl is going to find that as a big threat. So creating or building boundaries is considered as being a bad person. So they're going to try to keep it all together so the others don't get mad at them. Struggling with emotions. Normally I see this in practice that they tend to find it difficult to identify what they're feeling unless it's a good, what they call it, a good emotion. If anything feels so overwhelming, it's like, just do not talk about that. I do not experience that because I am a good person. Somehow it's related to I have to suppress all these, what they identify as a negative emotions, overwhelming emotions, so I can be this good person. Another thing is they tend to provide support and cover the needs of the others over theirs. And this is because a way for them to learn to survive in that stressful situation is I have to take care of your mom or dad. And again, this is just the characteristics of how these traumatic events that happened in the past are happening also in your adulthood life. I've seen beautiful women in the corporative environment feeling that, okay, if I'm responsible for everyone else's well-being, it is my responsibility to be not only in the professional environment, but also going back to families, right? I'm responsible in my family. I have to put family all together. I have to be strong for them. I'm the good one. I cannot remove this mask from myself because if I do that, my family is going to collapse. That's a lot of responsibility. That's why it's so important to understand that some of your behaviors as an adult were rooted in your childhood. And it's important to identify them with kindness, with love, with compassion, in order to work with them. They had a purpose in the past. But like I said before, it's just like they somehow got stuck in time, doing the same job over and over. At that time, they had a purpose. But an adult is somehow creating these difficult emotions and behaviors. So, what we do about that? Like I always say, awareness is the first step. Being aware of what's happening within you, being aware of your emotions, understanding where it is coming from, understanding it with love and caring. Also identifying that what happened to us in the past does not define you. We can always reframe it, we can always write it in a way that is meaningful to us, and we can always identify, okay, what I want to do with this. And that's something that you can learn to do in therapy. In a therapeutic journey, you will learn to identify these behaviors, to identify the coping mechanisms, and to be kind, to develop this compassion and kindness so you can later rewrite your story. And most important, to identify that here in present time, you can always bring yourself to the present moment and to identify who I want to be. Who I want to be if I feel safe. Who I want to be even though I feel under a stressful situation. I can then identify other coping mechanisms that can help me to deal with that. So just be kind to yourself. Identify where it is coming from. Important. Identifying that the role your parents had, and most of the time those were the tools they had. But identifying help us to start the healing journey. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Thank you for being here. Don't forget to visit the podcast Flowers in Winter. Don't forget to go to my website where you can find more information and blogs and articles. And also you can go to my Instagram account at Lucia Therapy, where you can find more information on mental health, women and mental health. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and see you next time.
Flowers in Winter is a podcast by Lucia Gallegos, music by Rosy Cervantes. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Facebook as Lucia Therapy.